We might get a few, just 28? Okay, here we go. Welcome. Good evening. My name is Mark Renwick, and I'd like to welcome you to the November meeting of the First Coast Free Thought Society. We are an organization of freethinkers, atheists, agnostics, humanists, and others who promote science, reason, and compassion over dogma, religious faith, and belief in the supernatural. And we struggle to keep our cats off of our keyboards. You can learn all about all of our activities on our Meetup group page, which is meetup.com/First Coast Free Thought Society. Next month, join us for our 17th annual Human Light Celebration. In prior years, as many of you know, we met at local restaurants. This year, due to coronavirus, the celebration will be virtual via Zoom. BYOB, meaning bring your own banquet. Festivities will include installation of incoming board members, and we will have several new ones to install this year, pleased to say, in addition to the general celebration of the season. During tonight's talk, feel free to use the chat window for comments, and as our speaker will mention he likes to be interrupted, and so there'll be many ways for you to interact with the speaker and ask questions. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to on our website. And following tonight's presentation, you are invited to stick around and chat with other attendees. Tonight's speaker is activist and educator Rabbi Merrill Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro is immediate past president of the Board of Trustees of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. He is the founding president of the Atlantic Coast, Florida chapter of AU. He is past president of the Flagler County Democratic Club and the Flagler Area Ministerial Association. Currently, he serves as president of the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society. He is a friend and member of the First Coast Free Thought Society and authors a column in our newsletter. Merrill currently resides with his wife, Robin, in Palm Coast, Florida. They have 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. And now let's welcome Merrill Shapiro. Take it away.
Thank you, Mark. And somehow I have lost my access to the chat window, but so somebody chat, please yell or scream, and you don't need to turn off mics or anything like that. This is me. Actually, let's go back to that first slide. It reminds me that I think, and Carrie Renwick knows better than I, was it 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago? She called on me even 10 weeks ago to decide on a topic. Now, we knew nothing much was going to happen between 10 weeks ago and today, other than the nomination of a new Supreme Court justice, an election, and who knew. So this was a guess and a stab at what we might discuss this evening. And so we came up with this, following the Yellow Brick Road. I tried to use more of a theme of the Wizard of Oz, but they're taking us down a Yellow Brick Road. We'll decide where that leads us. Again, I enjoy your questions, whether you want to interrupt and ask them at any time. You can always contact me at the email address here, rabbi32164@gmail. Always call me on my cell phone, 804-914-4460. I'd love to hear from you. This is my wife, Robin, who's also sitting next to me.
I don't look that good, man.
Okay. And we have, and Mark asked for this, but I had already planned it. And I apologize because many of you have heard this before, but we have 2 daughters, Sarah Shapiro-Plevin, who lives with her family in Manhattan in New York City, and Amy, who lives in Clayton County. And because Robert and I have raised these 2 daughters through their teenage years, as Mark knows, I'm most comfortable if you interrupt me while I'm speaking. So you can feel free. I've been well trained by them and many others as well. So don't hesitate. A brief introduction, I'll keep it brief. this part of this framework is prepared by the Washington Office of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. That's who I represent. I've recently, in the past 6 months or so, rotated off the board of directors and of the national board, but I remain active, as you see here. And I will try not to read to you what you can read for yourself right in front, but we're dedicated to the constitutional principle. And I might add that that's a conservative principle. That is, it was the intention of the founders of our country that church and state be separate. Oh, you're a bunch of liberals. No, we're not. Much of where we begin, our what I might call proof text, is found in the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I will make mention, as I did this with you 2 years ago, there is a problem, although courts have been friendly to non-believers, but the state of non-belief is not necessarily or not clearly protected through the First Amendment. And that's a problem that of which we need to be aware. Started in 1947, that's 2019, so this is old, but it's 2020, it's our 73rd anniversary. We defended rulings prohibiting governor in public schools all the time, the religious right, vouchers and voucher schemes that send their tax money to religious schools, and we've been combating a variety of new religious right groups, particularly those pushing Christian dominionism, that Christianity should rule our country. Our country would be best if our country were all Christian and run on Christian principles. And in fact, Pat Buchanan, some of you may remember Pat Buchanan, said the Constitution works best when everybody's Christian. That's presumably it's not working too well right now, but that's another discussion. So we believe every American has the right to practice religion of choice, or in the parentheses, refrain from taking part in religion as well. Government must remain neutral. We have a number of the departments, and some of this has changed recently with the change of our CEO. Mary Lynn has retired and Rachel Lacer has become our new CEO, but we file lawsuits when necessary, and there's 2 asterisks there because that's part of the topic for this evening. We have a legislative department that lobbies, both through the halls of Congress and are well known in the halls of Congress, and the state legislatures as well. I'm looking forward to Mark and Carrie's help in Tallahassee. Chapters located and activists located in state capitals are extremely important. We organize local chapters, encourage individuals to become activists, and work with students and other aligned organizations that share our values. I have a communications department that produces Church State Magazine, blogs on the website au.org, and constantly sending out press releases, of course. And so I'll go back to that legal department. It files lawsuits when necessary. However, this is part of the change. And there's our good friend whose picture is in the lower right-hand corner. Maybe I won't even say his name. The courts are not what they were even 3, 4, 5, and certainly 10 and 15 years ago. And so our relationship with the judiciary has changed as well. Well, there's his name, Mitch McConnell, he who will not be named. Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, described, as this is 2 weeks old already, Monday's confirmation of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett as a capstone to the relentless work, and much of it is his work. He has taken claim for it. He's done with President Trump to transform the federal judiciary since 2017. The truth of the matter is the effort's much older. Many of us are aware of the fact that Barack Obama nominated many judges, and of course that needs the advice and consent of the U.S. Senate. And Mitch McConnell who was called the Grim Reaper, aside from being called Moscow Mitch, that's another story. But the Grim Reaper would gather the nominations and put it on his desk where it went to die. So that when Donald Trump became president, there were 178 vacancies throughout the federal judiciary to be filled, and those nominations ultimately were made by Donald Trump and approved by the Republican Senate. Here's a quote from just past October 27th. Mitch McConnell says, the Louisville Courier-Journal, I think it was the most consequential thing we've done in the last 4 years that will last the longest. And we'll talk about that. He told the Courier-Journal on Tuesday, we've done some other important things legislatively, but depending on who wins future elections, those things may or may not stand. What's the most consequential thing? Why will it last for years? Nominating judges for lifetime appointments, and judges who are in their, in the case of Amy Coney Barrett, I think late 30s, 40s, and 50s, these people could be on the bench. These very conservative judges could be running our courts for 30, 40, or more years. And so the consequences of elections, and here in the state of Florida, on the state level, as well as on the federal level, the consequence of elections are many. One of the most important is that the executive gets ultimately to decide who will be our judges. And and the judges often have lifetime tenure. In the state of Florida, some judges, Supreme Court judges, I think, have a 10-year tenure, and then they come up for re-election. And I don't know how you vote on judges. You just saw your ballot, and there were judges. Shall we retain them? Shall we not? As opposed to those who were in elections, contested elections. But some of these people are also lifetime. We just keep voting them in over and over and over again. So since 2017, the Republican-controlled Senate, of which Mitch McConnell is the majority leader, has confirmed 220 federal judges nominated by Trump. That includes, of course, 3 Supreme Court justices, 1/3 of the court. And in each case, well, not in each case, but a liberal judge, and the most recent, of course, is RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, liberal, always came down on the liberal side, almost always came down on the liberal side, was replaced by a very conservative judge, Amy Coney Barrett, and Justice Anthony Kennedy, who apparently was prevailed upon by Donald Trump to resign, and he was replaced by a much more conservative, I think that was Neil Gorsuch. If not, it was Kavanaugh. Both are extremely much further to the right than the people they replaced. So again, at the bottom, McConnell says this, the latest approval and installation of Amy Coney Barrett is the capstone of McConnell's whole project. So the new reality is that bringing separation of church and state cases to the courts may, and some would say now almost always, may simply be giving bad judges opportunities to make bad law. And in the end, we might be better off not bringing those cases, or certainly being much more strategic about the cases we bring. That's Americans United for Separation of Church and State, as well as other groups. We need to be careful about what we bring to the court, because we're going to get a decision we're not going to be happy about. And that's happened in the state of Florida on the issue of religious school vouchers. It's happened in many states on the issue of women's reproductive rights. And it's happened on a national level as far as in Greece v. Galloway, the invocations at city council meetings. It happens that if we didn't bring the case, we might be somewhat better off leaving it ambiguous as opposed to getting a definitive decision of the courts. So because we can no longer count on taking the legal avenue, and I'll admit that Americans United for Separation of Church and State and similar liberal organizations have been caught up in society's bent towards being overly litigious. It's a great country. Anybody can sue anybody for anything. And so even on the playground in an elementary school, back when kids gathered on playgrounds in elementary schools, third graders and fourth graders would say, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue. I'm going to sue. Everybody sues. But again, the courts are not friendly to us. So if you have a cell phone, I would appreciate it if you'd take it out of your pocket or put it on the table next to your laptop or your computer, whatever, because I'm going to ask you to enter into that cell phone this telephone number, 904-354-4300. Please enter that phone number into your cell phone. And of course, you're going to need a name for that contact. So the name for that contact will be Senator Marco Rubio. And you may wish to include the fact that it's his Jacksonville office, because you can call him in his Miami office, you could call him in his Tampa office, you can call him in his Washington office. Were we meeting face to face? And I might as well here too. Have any of you ever called one of the senators? Have any of you called the legislator to express your opinion and how you feel? I urge you to ask people, have you called the legislator? Have you expressed your opinion on one matter or another? And would you, when I have an opportunity to open the chat anyway, that's it. So, all right, David Strong-Baird sends emails, and that's good as well. By the way, I will tell you, I will deny ever having said that. I will never deny ever having said this. But if you call, and Marco Rubio's office is but one of but many organizations, if you call Senator Marco Rubio to express an opinion, and then you send an email to Marco Rubio's office expressing the exact same thing, it could be verbatim the same thing, and then you write a letter, send it to him. By the way, handwritten letters do get attention. You can type out your letter, it's fine. But handwritten letters get attention, we've been told, because they're so very rare. But if you do, Marco Rubio's office will assume that they've made 3 different constituent contacts. So it's not very kosher of me to say it, but you can do all 3. But send it in, express your opinion. You will, and I would, wait, we'll get to whether Barrett's as crazy as Thomas or whether Thomas is not. That's one of the questions coming. But some people do here say they write, they email, they do respond to these. First of all, in some cases, you leave a message. Other cases, you are often speaking with a 21-year-old, a 22, 23, 24-year-old, either a first year or an intern or somebody in their office, and they'll only take down your opinion. By the way, they will ask you your zip code to make sure you're a constituent. In some cases, you can send them emails, and there's a filter, and if you're not from their zip code, you can't even send it through. They want to hear from their constituents. And so I urge you to be in touch. It's a fascinating experience. They do tally them. We'll say this one's pro the confirmation of Judge Barrett, this one's anti, and how many antis we got and how many pros we got. It costs you nothing. It's good practice. There will be times when it'll be much more important to you than other times. And it will, and it will remind you and the people in that office that that representative works for you. You do not work for Senator Marco Rubio. I'm not picking him out. We'll go on with the slides in a minute. You do not work for him. He works for you. He is your employee. And expressing your opinion helps to remind everybody of that. So in some of these, I've put a a picture, and this is my favorite picture of Marco Rubio. It appeared on his website and said, here's Marco Rubio talking to Representative John Lewis. But in fact, that happens to be the late John Lewis, by the way. That happens to be, let's see if this is not advancing. Hang on 1 second. I apologize. Yeah, there it is. That happens to be Elijah Cummings. So Marco Rubio labeled it on his, I'm sure some lackey of his, labeled it on his website that he's talking to John Lewis. He was really talking to Elijah Cummings, but you know what, we'll leave that alone. Take your telephone as well, your cell phone, and enter the number 904-479-7227. And as you might expect, you're going to need to label that contact. And so you can label it Senator Rick Scott, also his Jacksonville office. And when you have strong feelings about something that's going on, pick up your phone. Now the number's already there, just press dial. And when there's an answer or an answering machine or something, you say, I'm not very happy about how the government is handling coronavirus or the transition or anything else. Express your opinion. These people work for us, and they need to be reminded of that, and they represent us. They really need to be reminded of it. And you might say, it makes no difference. It's like banging my head against a wall. It's good practice for you as well. By the way, most of you, but perhaps not all, are represented by Congressman John Rutherford. Put his phone number in your phone as well, and just press the button and say, this is how I feel about such and such and such and such. By the way, on their website, if you send an email through their messaging system, they have a list of what's this about, what topic, and they have a long list of things. Is it about the military? Is it about climate change? Is it about the nuclear menace? Is it about LGBTQ rights or anything else? So there are thousands of topics on which I'm wagering you have an opinion, and you ought to let these people know, because there will be times that we will make a concerted effort, you and me and all of us, to get 100 phone calls to Congressman John Rutherford about some issue that will come up in Congress during the coming year or 2 years in this session. And finally, a few of you are in the district of Congressman Al Lawson. It's a gerrymandered district designed to include in almost entirely African-American neighborhoods. It was changed from Corinne Brown's district that went from the African-American neighborhoods of Jacksonville all the way down to a town next door to where I lived in Orlando, to the city of Eatonville. And it included all these people. So it was gerrymandered to include by race. And that's another issue in which you can complain about as well. But put his phone number in your memory of your phone and call frequently. Why? Because since legal is not a productive avenue for us to call attention to the separation of church and state, we're going to have to lobby. We're going to have to speak up in a concerted way to let people know, to let these legislators know we're paying attention and this is important to us. If we don't speak up, we'll surely get what we deserve. If we don't speak up, they'll walk away saying, no one really much cares about this issue one way or another. Actually, when to Orlando in 1983. In the year 2000, we took 6 years in Richmond, Virginia. I lobbied a legislator in Richmond, Virginia, who says, my people really don't care about LGBTQ rights, and it's a losing proposition. And there were a group of us came to his office to talk about them, and he said, my people don't care. And lo and behold, his next election, he was tossed out of office. So I said, guess what? We care, they care. I've just before this meeting spoke to Susan Erker, I believe, is managing this Facebook First Coast Three Thought Society activist page on Facebook. Its URL is listed at the top of the page. I hope that she or I will post these numbers on that page and do so regularly, and urge you to make calls. This is different from the Facebook page of the First Coast Free Thought Society. These are activists, and I urge you to become part of this group. It's got about 50 members now. The more phone calls we can marshal on the important issues, the better off we'll be. So further, going back to Americans United for Separation of Church and State, where these are our concerns: faith-based initiative, religion in public schools, official prayer, which has been fought in Brevard County, is actually being fought here in Flagler County. And I know Susan and Earl have spearheaded an issue of prayer being offered at city council meetings and for Jacksonville. School vouchers, and don't get me started, because the last time I went off the rails, but each and every one of us is paying to support education, Scientology education, Baptist education. A lot of our tax dollars go to Catholic schools and so on through school vouchers and government subsidies of religious schools. Religious refusals. Can a baker in Jacksonville refuse to bake a cake for a same-sex couple's wedding, but bake a similar cake for a heterosexual's wedding? That's part of it. Excuse me. Whether churches can endorse candidates, which they can, but then they lose their status as a 501c3 organization, and they have to pay taxes, and you have to pay taxes on the contributions you make. Marriage, reproductive rights, and so on. We engage in a project called Protect Thy Neighbor to protect LGBTQ people from those who use religion to discriminate against them. Fair play. We actually did not do too badly. Churches were involved more in a mask issue and whether they could hold services than to stand up. And some pastors stand up and endorse candidates right from their pulpit. And inclusion, we want to make sure that opening prayers at town and city councils includes everyone. Ideally, that will become so messy that legislative bodies in our towns will just say, this is too messy. Let's have a moment of silence instead. We'd be perfectly happy with that. Religion in the public schools is a great concern. The third item, the number of high school biology teachers who are afraid to teach evolution is increasing. If you know a high school biology teacher and can ask them and tell them it's entirely confidential, they'll talk to you about the fact that the teaching of evolution too often brings an angry parent to the principal's office to complain, what's this business about the world being 4 billion years old? The Bible says it's only 10,000 years old or 6,000 years old. That's a real problem. Faith-based initiatives is something else we're concerned about. Government-sponsored religion, be it through prayers or coming back are a few more religious displays for Christmas on town hall lawns. And the taxpayers are paying for, or even if taxpayers are not, it still looks like a government endorsement of religion. We fight those cases in courts, but once again, courts are not very friendly to us, increasingly less friendly, even local courts. So let's deal with the Supreme Court. I've gone on long enough about general matters, except of course, as it relates to calling our legislators. So a case comes before the Supreme Court, works its way up the courts, Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue. We took the position that taxpayers cannot be forced to pay tuition for children who don't want to go to the public schools, but instead want to go to religious schools with a private school voucher paid for by our tax money and yours. And this happens here in Florida to the tune of $1 billion a year through the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Scheme. So you are paying to send kids to Seventh-day Adventist schools. You are, by the way, you are paying your Catholic neighbors and friends, Catholics all over Florida, are paying to send kids to Seventh-day Adventist schools. And the curriculum of the Seventh-day Adventist school teaches the Pope is the Antichrist. And you and I are paying to send kids to Baptist schools where they study, among other things, the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 8, in which Jesus says Jews are of the devil, Jews are satanic, and we're paying for that. And Mormons are being paid to have kids go to schools where they teach that Mormons aren't Christians, and we're all paying to send kids to a Scientology high school in Clearwater. We were paying, have since gone out of business, to send kids to a high school that encouraged their students to go out into the public square, tear up and burn Qurans and talk about how bad Islam is. That's not who we are. So Kendra Espinoza, here she is, and her daughters couldn't afford Stillwater Christian Academy in Kalispell, Montana. And the public school, there were bullying and foul language was used, and Kendra did not like that idea. So she wanted to send her two daughters right there, to Stillwater Christian Academy. However, there had been a program that provided, as you see, a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for taxpayers who make a donation to a student scholarship organization. In Florida, it's called Step Up for Students, but there's one in Montana. So you make a donation, you get to deduct it from your taxes, and the money goes to send the Espinoza girls to Stillwater Christian Academy. Now, what happens when that donation, let's say it's $100 or $1,000 or $3,000, does not reach the treasury of the state of Montana? The taxpayers have to make up the difference. Because Montana, like Florida, has a no aid clause that says no monies from the public treasury shall go to any religious organization. Yet, and so on that basis, this court in the Montana Supreme Court stopped the program. And then an appeal followed. First, they argued that the Montana court violate the First Amendment and equal protection, that they have a freedom of religion to send their kid to religious school. Not to mention that they want us to pay for it, but they are free to practice the religion that they want. And they're equally protected under the 14th Amendment. The state pays for public school kids to go to public school. Why? They're equally protected as they're religious people. State should pay money for their children to go to religious schools as well. You and I should pay. And so, by the way, that was left in place. We lost this case. Again, an overwhelmingly conservative judiciary, and it is now the modus operandi in Montana. Some people pay tax dollars to send kids to religious schools. Those people who don't pay and don't want to send the kids are left holding the bag and must make up the money to the state treasury. Let's go, here we go. So here's Agnes Morrissey-Berru is in a litigation against Our Lady of Guadalupe School. This comes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that the ministerial exceptions, and we'll get to that, means teachers at a private religious school aren't protected from unemployment discrimination. What does that mean? What the ministerial exception says, it's true that you and I as employers cannot discriminate on the basis of religion in hiring an employee, except that unless we're part of a church, a synagogue, a mosque, we can discriminate. And I think it's entirely reasonable that a church can discriminate against a Jew becoming their pastor. And a mosque can say, no, we don't want a Catholic as our imam, and so on. So for ministerial exception, but Agnes Morrissey-Berru was just a teacher in the school. Here she is. She's become a full-time teacher at this Catholic parochial school. She taught 5th grade. Her responsibilities were expanded late in her career to incorporating religious doctrine into her teaching. And so she was fired because of her age, largely. There's questions about sectoral orientation. It really didn't become a matter related to the litigation. And she sued and said, this is age discrimination. If I were a younger woman, you wouldn't be firing me. And that's a different case. And so that's why you're throwing me out, and that's discrimination on the basis of age. And they said she's not protected by laws about discrimination on her age because she's working as a minister in the Catholic Church. By the way, she's a woman, and I believe she's gay, but I'm not sure. And therefore, the ministerial exception allows us to choose anyone we'd like and to reject anyone we'd like without regard to race, religion, color, or creed. And she lost this case. And in fact, Our Lady of Guadalupe School and schools in general can fire people. It doesn't seem right, but they can fire people. I don't remember what state this is in. Hang on one second. Let's see. Yeah, I should have had more. You can look that up. Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure what state it's in. I'll have to find out. You can look it up, by the way. Look up Morrissey-Berru and notice it's spelled B-E-R-R-U, and you can find out the difference. Here is an organization called the Little Sisters of the Poor, Saints Peter and Paul Home versus Pennsylvania. Little Sisters of the Poor employ a significant number of janitorial staff, of aides and so on. It's a home for people who are older, like a nursing home, who need help and so on, but it's largely charitable. However, they decided it was proper to have all of their employees covered by health care. Now, the 4 years in the fourth line here, the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. However, they wanted an exemption, and Hobby Lobby and others have done the same thing. They wanted an exemption and did not want to pay for contraception since they don't believe in contraception. The lower courts agreed with us that they can't withhold contraception. However, it is the opinion of the Supreme Court that organizations like St. Peter and Paul, and even like Home Depot and Chick-fil-A and others, have a religion in and of themselves. Now, it's only been a few years since Citizens United, the Citizens United case, when it was declared by the courts that a corporation can be a person and has covered by free speech. Money is free speech, so a corporation can give lots of money to politicians. But here, the corporation has a religion, and since it would violate their religious sensibilities to provide contraception, even to their poorest of their workers, they can do it based on a Supreme Court opinion, a decision. The opinion was written by Clarence Thomas. The ruling was 7-2. So some liberal, I think Elena Kagan as well, the Department of Health, Human Services, and Labor had the legal authority to create exemptions so that organizations that don't feel they should provide contraceptive care can be exempt from that portion of the Affordable Care Act / Obamacare. By the way, this leads to the question of, does Hobby Lobby, do Chick-fil-A, do the corporate entity, do they have a religion? And what happens if somebody of a different religion comes and buys one of those corporations? Does the religion of the corporation change? It's nonsensical. It seems nonsensical, but in fact, that's the way it is, unfortunately. We don't have to agree with it, but the Supreme Court, now overwhelmingly conservative, but this was before it was overwhelmingly conservative, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg made a decision on this case as well, wrote a decision, wrote an opinion, and the court is even more conservative than it is now. Let's see, let me just read one of the chats. I always like to think that if a judge knows he or she may have to go back to no longer being a judge and get a different job, someday they may be more considerate on the bench. Federal judges are appointed for life, so they don't need to go get another job. And so that's the problem. Yeah, if they had to deal with things the way we do, and we might lose our jobs, we would be a little bit more forgiving.
What was the name of Mrs.?
Oh, Our Lady of Guadalupe is in Hermosa Beach, California. Thank you, Donna.
I can't find it on the internet.
Yeah. No, okay. So let's go on to the question of Gerald Bostock. He's an employee of Clayton County, Georgia, within the Atlanta metropolitan area. He works for the juvenile court system and has an excellent employment record. In early 2013, he joined a gay softball league and promoted it at work for volunteerism. In April 2013, Clayton County conducted an audit of funds controlled by Bostock and fired him for conduct unbecoming a county employee. The state of Georgia was one of those states without any law protecting LGBT people from employment. Now, this happens to be a case, Bostock versus Clayton County, that went to the 11th Circuit. That's our circuit of federal courts. It's Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. The lower courts followed the past precedent and said Title VII did not cover employment discrimination protection based on sexual orientation. And here you see the oral arguments were heard in last October. It was combined with another case, a funeral home case that wanted to fire a gay employee. And in the end, we won this case. The court ruled in a 6-3 decision with Justice John Roberts on our side that the law says, no, you can't deny sexual orientation because of sex, and therefore LGBTQ people are protected from being fired simply because of their sexual orientation. Now, as you see at the bottom paragraph, it's hailed as one of the most important legal decisions regarding LGBT rights. And so there is some good news from the Supreme Court, but with a liberal judge, like with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, being replaced by Amy Coney Barrett, this case surely would have been 5-4, and could have been 5-4, or could be 4-5 the other way. It's not really clear. And so that's a bit of a problem as well. Hang on one second, I'll take a look at the chat messages. Circuit judges from the state, I believe, yes, I believe once you're appointed, even if you have to stand for election, you're pretty much in. And that even contested lower family courts and local circuit courts. All of them tend to re-elect the same person over and over again. Just as we keep, for some reason, re-electing the same congressman over and over, the same representatives in Tallahassee. We keep over and over and over again. And so the power of incumbency is very great. Now Okay, so if somebody writes, I am an atheist, but I also don't like to use force unless it's really necessary, so I would not force businesses to provide services they find offensive or hire protected people. And so the answer to that is, if a business says, my religion, or even my, not religion, just my feeling is, I don't want to hire black people. Is that okay? They cannot hire black people. I don't want to hire gay people. I don't want to hire people who are atheists. There have been businesses, we don't want to hire you if you don't believe in God. And so that's a bit problematic. We could discuss a little bit further. And so, by the way, Neil Gorsuch surprisingly joined John Roberts and the liberal wing of the court and voted on our side so that LGBTQ rights have been preserved. Let's see if I can get this to advance. A second. Okay, so here is an interesting question that you may have read about as well. One of the saving graces of lifetime appointments and lifetime appointments of conservative judges is revealed by this study by Professors Martin and Quinn, that the ideological ratings of Supreme Court justices, it says at the top, as they age since 1937. In the plus section, let's see if I can move my cursor, I don't know if you can see my cursor. In the plus section, they are conservative. Notice that at age 50, on average, judges nominated by Republicans are fairly conservative. And judges nominated by Democrats are within the liberal side of things. But when we go to 60, Democrats have barely changed. We're seeing that Republicans are moving to the right. By the way, each of these dots throughout here, this is the lines represent an average. Each of these dots is a Supreme Court case that they had to either write or join somebody else's opinion. So that by the time a Supreme Court justice is 70, and for some of the current justices, Kavanaugh, I don't know about Howell Gorsuch, but certainly Barrett, they've got quite a few years before they're 70. But by the time they're 70, they tend to move towards the left. And this was evident in many important liberal causes, including Roe v. Wade, that formerly conservative judges became liberal as time went on. And so we do have some hope as far as that's concerned. I must add this from this past week. Some of you are aware that Justice Alito, who was so much like Justice Scalia that it was called Scalito by some, gave a speech to the Heritage Society. The Heritage Society, we happen to have a relative by marriage who worked who was prominent in the American Bar Association. The American Bar Association used to vet federal judges, even the Supreme Court judges. Now, the Trump administration has turned that over to the ultra-conservative Heritage Foundation. Alito gave a speech to the Heritage Foundation this past week, and he said he was very critical of the ruling of the Supreme Court in July that rejected the Nevada church's challenge to state restrictions on attendance at religious services. State of Nevada said you can't have a large gathering. You see a 50-person limit is the number of people you can have in your church, even if some of these churches have seating for 1, 2, 3,000 or more. 50 people. We don't want to expose anybody needlessly to coronavirus and have them spread it around. And Alito said, interestingly, casinos are limited to 50% of their fire code capacities. So a casino can have hundreds of people, but a house of worship only 50. So Alito said deciding whether to allow this disparate treatment should not have been a very tough call. Take a quick look at the Constitution, free exercise clause of the First Amendment. You'll not find a craps clause or a blackjack clause or a slot machine clause. There's a religion clause. They can do what they want. The fallacy that I find here is that religion is expressed in many more ways than how many people gather together on a Sunday. And as such, I think he's off base. I'm not the only one. My brother, I don't know if he's joined us, sent me this in the past week. Yeah, so we want our Supreme Court to honor not the Bible, but the Constitution. Because America, of course, is not a church. And in fact, it's a very conservative value. The founders intended there to be separation of church and state. And so this is an old picture. I'm going to get a new picture in a little bit. But of course, Justice Scalia is no longer with us. And Justice Kennedy has retired. He used to be the middle swing vote. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course, we lost very recently. For that reason, I just wanted to urge you to get to know this, since these people's names are in the paper and so on, whether you recognize Justice Gorsuch, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, Justice Kavanaugh, and try when you look at him not to think of the phrase, "I like beer." Here's Justice Breyer, Justice Thomas, Chief Justice Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett will be sitting here where RBG is, and here's Alito, who made that speech in the past week. We should know these people, they're rather important. So we can discuss this further, and I could go on and on. I've gone on too long already. Feel free to be in touch and to call me, and I'm happy to take your questions, your observations, and so on. I'll unmute yourself, and we can discuss. There's no question out of bounds. Feel free. I do not get offended, but I'm glad to have had this opportunity to go over this material with you. Thank you very much.
Hey, I'll go first. Anybody else?
Please.
So we use the term conservative and liberal, and I'm wondering if we should start using new terms. Like at the beginning of the talk, it seemed like you said something is a conservative issue, like church-state separation has been with us a long time, which it might fall within conservative. So what if we wanted to use a different meme besides conservative and liberal, what would you use?
That's a good question. Certainly, I'd have to give that some thought, Susan. What we'll use rather than conservative. How about left and right? No, would that make better? And that goes back to what the French legislator back several centuries ago. Let's call them left and right. However, I think you make a larger important point. We, and I'm talking about us, we have allowed, and I'll call them the right, to define terms and to set the language that's in use, and thereby control much of the argument. And if you need to read George Orwell, I urge you to do so. And so they don't talk about a woman's reproductive rights. They talk about whether you're pro-life or pro-abortion. So the world to them is divided between those who are pro-life.
When you turn on the volume.
We're all pro-life, and none of us is pro-abortion. None of us go and urge women, oh, go have an abortion, go have an abortion. They have co-opted that language, and there are many other areas in which they've co-opted the language, and we have almost lost the argument by fitting into their structure that they have established through the names. So if you don't like conservative and orthodox, I'm reverting to my rabbinic. If you don't like conservative and liberal, perhaps we should use left and right. Other questions, comments, observations?
Yeah, can I chime in with Susan?
By all means. comments? Anybody?
I think Susan brings up a valid point. This liberal versus conservative, that word conservative really doesn't represent what's going on with Republicans. They are restrictive. They want to restrict freedom, for starters. Okay, so anything that means restrictive or reducing your freedoms, to me, would be a proper meme. And when we say liberal, it just seems to me that a more correct word might be something related to progress, progressive. We say liberal progressive, but I say get rid of the liberal and let's just say that we are the progressive movement. We want to move forward. We want to make progress. There you go.
I would agree, although there's an increasing movement that says, I'm not going to allow the right to define liberal as a dirty word. And therefore, I'm going to call myself a proud liberal. And you'll see, but yeah, and right, and then they'll go and make progressive a dirty word or whatever.
It is
and so it is important, but we need to get out there ahead of them right on the language issue. By the way, the other one that comes to mind is the issue of school choice, that we on the left are opposed to school choice. Well, you know what? All of us had school choice. I suspect all of us. And Fred, I see, is that your hand? All of us have had school choice, and we could have gone to several local schools other than public schools. And children today can go to several different schools rather than public schools. The issue is not school choice, but the issue is who pays for it. They want to have school choice, and they want us to pay for it if it's not a public school. Even though the Constitution of the state of Florida, by the way, in Title IX, says that it is a paramount duty of the state to provide that is a single high quality system of free public education. So we do have to get ahead of the language issue. You're absolutely right.
I'm Andy Germain. I'll speak to that if you'd like.
Okay, Fred. Fred was next, and then Andy will come to you. Fred, if you would please, Fred, and then Andy.
Well, I was going to say another word for conservative is reactionary, because most of the time they're reacting against progress. They're saying, oh, we don't like that progress. Let's go back.
You know what? Perhaps we should call them reactionary. And maybe it's my fault of hearing Michelle Obama say, when they go high, when they go low, we go high. I will tell you, I have frequently, when confronted with clergymen who talk about the Old Testament, assured them that ours was the primary and first testament, and that maybe there's the secondary or second testament. But I don't know whether we want to be contentious about it. But maybe we do, because they're so contentious. Good question. Andy Germain was next.
Yeah, okay, I'm Andy Germain. I haven't contributed much to this group or ever, but
we're glad to have you.
I live in Palm Coast. Also, I'm an atheist.
Oh.
So I have Jewish heritage, by the way. So
okay,
you've lost one. But my parents were non-practicing.
Okay.
So I politically, by the way, I could be called a classical liberal or a libertarian. I work for the federal government, by the way, but I recognize that the limitations of the federal government. And you all seem to want to use force a lot. You want to force people to do things that they don't want to do. So I'm quite willing to use force to stop people from murdering and raping and things like, and stealing even. But as far as what business should serve, my brother's gay, and I have a lot of opinions, but I don't want to enforce those opinions on other people. And I think that's a mistake that the progressive left, which I'm not a member of, I'm a libertarian, politically, I believe that the progressive left really wants to force people to live the way they think. And of course, they blame the Republicans, which I'm not, and I recognize all the deficiencies of the current Republicans and others. But they want to force people to do certain things their way, and this group seems to want to force people to do things their way as well, a different way than the Republicans do, but just as bad in my opinion. Thanks.
Yeah, typical libertarian. Fred, were you raising your hand to respond?
Yeah, I was going to say that the Republicans are trying to force their will on others, saying, well, I mean, well, not Republicans, but in the old South, there, you know, before the Civil Rights era, they're saying, oh, we shouldn't be forced to allow blacks into our restaurant, and they're just, you know, making willy-nilly choices that they're discriminating, and no one should be allowed to discriminate on basis of, you know, things like that. Okay, they're coming without a shirt. Okay, they can discriminate against that if you're shirtless, but to discriminate on the basis of your skin color, your ethnicity, your religion, even your sexuality, that is as far as I'm concerned, that's un-American. I mean, that's been a tradition for a long time, but something we should be ashamed of. And the law should, prevent people from discriminating in a business, because you're a business that's a public entity, and you shouldn't have the right to discriminate just on a whim because you don't like people of a certain color, or you don't like people of a certain religion, or people your sexual orientation. That's not forcing. That's you're saying you cannot discriminate.
Well, let me comment on that. I have recommendations. My recommendation would agree with you 100%. I don't think you should discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, which I would like to use as an example. And so if you force a baker to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, which they object to, which I don't, but they might, and I just see that as a can of worms, because what's going to happen most likely is that the gay couple is going to say, you did a bad job, and sue them and bring them to court. And this can of worms is just never ending, because there's a whole continuum of possibilities of why this gay couple may say that. Now, the one extreme would be that they were going to say that regardless. They just want to make trouble. And the other extreme is that the baker urinated in the batter because they hate them. So both sides could possibly be right a priori. We don't know. But there are many middle cases. Like, what if they just did the best they could, but the gay couple didn't like the job? Who's going to decide these things? This is insane to force them to do a job which is then classified as inferior, and it's never-ending problem. So I don't like forcing people to do things that they object to.
Any other responses or other questions, comments, observations? I might ask Andy, suppose you're a baker and a black couple is getting married, or actually even a multiracial, a black man is marrying a white woman. Can you, it's okay to refuse to make a cake for that?
I just don't want to force a business to serve anybody they object to because of this can of worms that come about if they decide that the product was inferior. Okay. And it'll tie up the courts for decades. And why use force? Force is, we libertarians think of laws being backed by a gun. So would you stick a gun to their head and that's basically what you're doing when you pass a law. You're saying, we'll stick a gun to your head if you don't do it our way. And I support the ways that we like. I would recommend to any baker to bake a cake for a gay couple or an interracial couple. Not a problem for me. But some people are irrational and they have problems with this. And to force them to do it is just, I think that's going to create more problems than it solves.
Thank you. Richard? Ethan?
Yeah, I don't know why any gay couple would want to use a cake maker who is prejudiced against them. I mean, go somewhere else. Let them lose the business. If he keeps doing that enough, he'll go out of business.
Exactly. That makes great sense.
Okay, that works well where there's no monopoly. Suppose I wanted to run a bus company and I wanted black people to sit in the back of the bus and white people to sit in the front. But Richard, I would also remind you, maybe you weren't aware, that preceding the bake, that's it was a Colorado company, was another company in the upper Midwest in which the gay couple wanted to order 20 pizzas, and the pizza place said, we won't do pizzas for a gay couple. And a bunch of us said, what kind of wedding is this catered by Pizza Hut or something like that? You wouldn't want to deal with them either. But yeah,
Hey,
sadly there are people.
I just went to a wedding 2 weeks ago. Heterosexual white couple, and they had donuts instead of a wedding cake.
Yeah, I mean, you know what, that's fine, and so on. However, it can become comical. But in this particular case, Andy, I suspect you're in a very small minority, and the rest of us would say, we think we as a people should stand up and use the power of government to say, you can't force blacks to sit in one section of the restaurant while people of other races sit in a different section of the restaurant, as one example. But
well, again, my recommendation, I agree with you as the best practice, but I just don't like using force except for things like serious crimes.
okay, by the way, the issue comes up, and this actually has fallen under the rubric of religious cases, and that is, can the government force people in a church to wear masks? Can it limit the size of a church service, as we saw in that case in Nevada, and so on? And there are those who talk about, and this is relevant, I believe, Andy, that while we have gone too far in stressing all of our rights, we have a right to do this, we have a right to go without a mask, we have a right to drive our car on the left side of the road if we want, we have a right to ride without a helmet on our motorcycle or a seatbelt on our seat. Whatever became of our responsibilities? That we have
Right.
responsibility. By the way, do you feel the government should be able to force you to pay taxes, Andy?
Yes, I think of taxes as a necessary evil. But I would also like to comment on some of your other cases you just brought up. You don't have the right, as a libertarian, I don't think people have the right to inflict danger on other people. So driving on the left side of the road is clearly a danger to other people. Not wearing your seatbelt is a danger to yourself. So I find a differentiation between those two cases.
Okay, I understand. Are there other comments, questions, observations? If Donna?
Yes, hold on a second.
By the way,
Getting used to this, sorry.
I understand entirely. If I can interrupt you, the name Warnock, is the name Warnock the name of the person running for Senate in Georgia?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
We're a 501c3 organization, but those people are awfully close to us, and I think some of us may have something to say about them. I would urge you to speak up. Nonetheless, Donna, I apologize.
I'm very proud to have the same name as a
I think you should.
candidate. They say we're all related, but I think it's obvious that there's
some difference.
You never know.
Yeah. So anyway, I had put a remark on the chat before when I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
Right, I apologize.
George Lakoff, the political cognitive linguist with whom I had the pleasure of studying, he takes issue with using the terms left and right. And the reason is because there are areas where each goes into the other's realm. For example, there are very left-wing pacifists who are opposed to abortion. There are conservatives who run their church life or their military encampments like a commune, or, liberal views when it comes to just being in their own community. So I think that we're ways off from finding the perfect concept, and that in the meantime, we just have to use our words.
I agree, and now I'll represent the philosopher of the, well, it's not now, I used to say the last century. I can't get over the idea that I was born in the first half of the last century, not even the second half. Wilhelm Hegel, who saw this as a dialectic, as a continuum. That we, thanks to politics today, and no thanks to politics today, see ourselves as anchored in one spot and everybody's got their own position. In fact, we live on a continuum. And further, we can move about that continuum. We have to be able to justify reasonably where we stand and why we take this position. But we can move it, and some days we're a little bit further to the, if you'll excuse, to the left and then the other to the right. By the way, that arouses also prejudices against lefties, southpaws, and so on. It's far complicated issues. It's the limitations of language. And in truth, we're not going to find a perfect descriptor, but it is important that we get in there first and we define what the issues are. And we define the language, and not have people decide that since we're not pro-life, which we really are, we must be pro-abortion.
Well,
none of us are pro-abortion.
That ship has already sailed.
Okay.
The conservative movement, that since back with Vigory, has trained their minions in very sophisticated communication skills and lobbying organizations and so forth. And they understood the importance of language in a way that the left never did. Here I'm using that term left, but in a way that progressives never have appreciated. And so we've lost a grip on the language.
Yeah. By the way, I think Bill Clinton has observed that many years ago, and others have as well. And when challenged, it's very hard for people on the left to come up with statements that will fit on a bumper sticker. Right, excuse me for using the term right, they're great at reducing their statements to a bumper sticker. And it's the nature of the beast. I think I'm prejudiced here, I'll acknowledge it, but I think we're the thinking people, and maybe not. It's a terrible thing to say. I plead guilty, but it's hard for us to reduce our philosophy to a bumper sticker. But
I have a story if you want.
You know, as opposed to saying we're the thinking people or feeling badly about that, we can look and say one of the characteristics of the conservatives whom we're criticizing is extreme hierarchical deference to whoever is on top in their organization. And in that respect, they don't think, they obey.
I agree. There's a great deal being written about whether Donald Trump is a natural outcome of where the right has been heading for the past 10 or 15 years and is just a feature of it, or whether Donald Trump has led the way to where the right is now. Complicated issues, and certainly beyond what we're supposed to be talking about this evening, number one. And number two, again, we are an internal revenue. Fred, I see your hand, I'll catch you. There is, well, let's go to Fred. Go ahead.
I was just going to bring up a topic. This is something that's come up again and again, but how, you know, the right seems to be
I got you, Andy.
Like they've been more politically strategic, you know, over long-term goals. For the left, we tend to splinter along, you know, the one splintering aspect is that candidate's not perfect. Not that candidate has done this or did that, which I dislike, so they're not absolutely perfect. I'm going to vote for this fifth party candidate who has no chance of winning because that candidate is more what I consider perfect than this other candidate. So we're going to make sure that the better candidate or the candidate has a better chance of winning.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to just limit that because he's not absolutely perfect. But I know that's a big,
Right.
thing, but they're trying to look at the big picture and say, now we got these ultra conservatives or very conservative court, as well as not just the Supreme Court, but other levels of the court. They're very conservative now.
Yep.
Because, and I don't know if this is the whole issue or whether, there are many issues involved, but
Right.
also the fact that these conservatives aren't even representing a vast majority of the population of this country. Because that's probably goes to the way the Constitution was made up. And also the gerrymandering and so forth, which has meant that a very relatively small percentage of the population has a very big impact on the judiciary and our politics.
Absolutely. And there were several things to note. One was a study that notes that while Donald Trump got 2 or 3 million votes, the proportion of the people across the country who voted to liberalize drug laws was very high. So it doesn't. These are much more complex issues than we think. And by the way, we'd like to think that it's possible to create a perfect union. The preamble to the Constitution, as Barack Obama has been running around pointing out, calls for us to create a more perfect union. We can't create a perfect union. We're human beings after all, but we can strive to create a more perfect union than the one we have. There were others. If not, I want to thank you all. You've made me think, and I'm glad for that opportunity. Andy, do you have one final comment? And
Well, I was going to tell a story if you've got a minute or two.
I'll tell you what, Mark has been kind enough to indicate that we'll stay on after the official meeting is over, and then you
Okay, that sounds fair.
So again, I've enjoyed the opportunity to interact with you and to at least hopefully bring you a little bit up to speed, or perhaps even arouse your interest to explore some of these issues further. But the meaning of elections is who gets to decide and install the judiciary, and that's a real problem. There are other tools in our toolbox other than filing suits and bringing it to court that we can use to achieve our goal of limiting, if not wiping out, the notion of theocracy here in the United States. So I thank you for taking the time to be with us, and I appreciate your response. And urge you to be safe. Well, you know what, Mark will talk about the next meeting on the third month of next month. But please be safe. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Away from people, so that one day we'll all get together in the same room once again in good health and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merrill.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it. Always
Thank
informative.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Andy, you've got the floor.
All right, I have a story if you're interested. I used to live in Washington, D.C. area, and the Politics and Prose bookstore had many authors give talks, and I went to quite a few. And the one I'm going to talk about was from Christopher Hitchens. Of course, he's no longer with us, but he is a noted atheist. He told a couple stories which I remember, which you reminded me of it when you mentioned Bill Clinton as a wordsmith. He is a spectacular wordsmith. And so one of the stories that Christopher Hitchens told related to the fact that he said, he was at Oxford. Christopher Hitchens was at Oxford the same time that Bill Clinton was as a Rhodes Scholar. And he commented on the fact that he could attest from personal knowledge that Bill Clinton, in fact, did not inhale marijuana. He said Clinton preferred his marijuana in brownies. So that was his personal knowledge, how Clinton was able to deflect the question and not say he didn't use marijuana, but said he didn't inhale. The other story that Hitchens told was about Mother Teresa. In order to become a saint, my understanding, is that there has to be I'm not sure that they have a name for it, but I don't know the name, but basically a hearing in which someone opposes sainthood for the candidate, and that person has a title of devil's advocate. That's where it came from. And Hitchens was, in fact, the devil's advocate against Mother Teresa, but he lost. That's all. 2 stories from Hitchens.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything? Any other comments?
Hey, Merrill, I have another question if you're not ready to hang up yet.
I'm not. I've got a busy schedule. I've got concerts to go to and lectures to hear and movies to see and big parties to
Laundry
attend.
to do.
Yeah, laundry to do. And so by all means, Susan, please.
So the public accommodation law has been around a very long time, and I read an article about it one time, and it seemed to say it was back in the time when we were a very small populated country, so there might only be one general store, and they didn't want the one general store to say, not let certain people in. So the public accommodation law is very old. It's so, and the other thing is that laws, it doesn't seem like a big deal about the cake thing, but it's the precedent that it sets, that if you can discriminate against somebody because you don't like something about them, it sets a bad precedent. So is that, and I think this is what you said, so I guess I'm just sort of getting you to reinforce it. The reason that AU isn't bringing lawsuits is because there's really bad judges now, and losing those because of people like Clarence Thomas or Amy Coney Barrett will set a bad precedent for the future. We still hope we'll get better judges. Is that correct?
That's where we're going. By the way, I didn't mention there's an increasing movement that recognizes that our problems are not solved through 501c3 or charitable organizations that can't enter the political arena, and that we should all form PACs. And as PACs, we should collect money and give money to candidates who share our point of view and hope and work for them to defeat other candidates. We cannot take a political stand as a 501c3, as the Free Thought Society is. That's number one. There was a second response, but yeah, no, bringing legal cases is just going to make bad law and bring us into trouble. So instead, if we can inundate, I use the word inundate, then perhaps we all, the Free Thought Society, can choose an issue and say, we're all going to call Marco Rubio's office on the same day and inundate his office with phone calls, saying, for example, please congratulate Joe Biden on his, and Kamala Harris on his elections, on their election, that perhaps in that way we can make some kind of dent that will not have the power of precedent that a bad court decision will. So
does AU have a 501c4? Do they have a super PAC or a PAC?
No, AU does not have a 501c4. It's been discussed, but a 501c4 can engage in partisan politics. And by the way, a donation to a 501c4 is not deductible on your taxes, but they can engage in partisan politics. And the world is getting to be such a partisan political place that we can't sit this out. We need to be involved. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Can I add something to this? Not all political action has to be in the courts or lobbying legislators. There's important work to be done in the streets and in direct action of all different kinds of, picketing a legislator's house instead of just lobbying and so forth. So I think we need that time-honored tradition as well.
By the way, I would include that in lobbying, that what you're doing when you're picketing in front of a legislator's house, and I think all for it exactly, is urging and trying to convince that legislator that they need to rethink and think the way we think. So no, I include that in lobbying.
Well, it can be included in lobbying, but it doesn't have to be lobbying at all. For example, I was very involved in the anti-nuclear movement. We weren't necessarily lobbying at any given point when we had a demonstration. We were basically trying to raise public awareness.
So what do we, thank you, Donna. We have debated informally at Americans United for Separation in Church and State how we feel about Don Quixote. Okay? So the question is, are we going to go out and tilt at windmills? We know we can't win. And somebody will say, yeah, and I sense that Donna's saying, yeah, we're going, even though we can't win, we're going to go tilt at windmills. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar, those windmills are really crosses. And that's what Cervantes is talking about, the church. But others have said, no, let's only pick battles and focus our efforts intensely on battles we can win, because creating a literature of success will help us build on something else. So those are the two sides of the argument. But lobbying, in our definition, is attempting to influence legislation.
Right.
And thus, you can do it by crowding the sidewalk in front of a legislator's house. You can do it in many different ways. And so that's our definition of lobbying at any rate.
Merrill.
I take issue with this, calling it tilting at windmills. When I started in the
And I've got you, we'll come back to it.
Let me just say, when I started the anti-nuclear movement, they planned to have 1,000 reactors around the country by the year 2000. Within 5 years, we had it stopped in its tracks. Now, we still have the legacy reactors around today, but the industry couldn't get anywhere. And that was grassroots action that did that. So, don't assume it's all tilting at windmills.
Well, you know what? So you have to decide what's tilting at windmills. What can't we win, but we need to speak up on anyway? What can where can we exert influence? Absolutely. Ken.
Thank you. Merrill, first of all, thank you for taking your time and spending all of this effort with us and giving a compendium of what you were able to coalesce from all of the cases that you referenced and everything that you talked about. But in the most recent moments of the evening, you just now talked about the battle, what we can win. So if we're going to reference military-like or gamesmanship-like references, in your mind, what does it look like to win?
Don't forget that, and chess is a good example because I'm going to use the language of chess, that at for some, a victory is to force a stalemate. In the end,
I'm asking you, but I'm asking you, not some. Okay. I'm not asking what victory looks like. I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Based on your, and let me make it one more step.
Sure.
Based on your involvement with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, what does victory look like based on your involvement with that organization and relative to today? What does it feel like? What does it look like to you? Not generally what does victory look like, but specifically to you.
Particularly to me, it means pushing back and moving people away from theocratic thought and theocratic goals for our country and for our government. And I didn't talk about Christian dominionism. I may have made a reference to it, but we have an obligation. For me, victory is simply speaking up and getting people to speak up and not remain silent on the issue. There's a silent majority, and Spiro Agnew may have thought the silent majority was on Nixon's side, but in fact, the silent majority includes, by the way, what are called low information voters, people who don't read newspaper, people who get their news from news feeds on Facebook or who knows where. So victory is, for me, by the way, personally, victory is successfully educating people to understand the issues. Battle means pushing back, but not ever achieving our goals. And I'll go back to my hero, by the way, it was somewhat anti-Semitic, Hegel, the philosopher. We're all between two extremes, and I'd like to move the extreme away from theology, more close to the side, and I won't say it's whether it's left or right, more close to the side that values democracy rather than theocracy. And I truly see, and perhaps you do as well, instances where there are proponents of theocracy. You know what, I got to go back, since I mentioned her name 20 times earlier this week. She's not, none of you are in I don't think you're in Kim Daniels' or state senator district, but for her, I believe it was a victory to get a bill passed that every classroom in this state has to have a sign that says, "In God We Trust." And I think she saw a victory. And I think, by the way, it was for her a victory, and she would use the terms of warfare. And I think we didn't even show up. And so I've been running around talking to others, and that we ask that the First Amendment, or there's a same amendment, a separation of church and state amendment to might be in Article 3 of our state constitution, that we should require every classroom to have a sign that says the government shall make no law with respect to the establishment of a religion, and have that sign put up there. But that is a quote unquote battle. I don't know that we could win. And I don't know where I stand on Don Quixote, but she battled to have that pass, and she won her battle.
Right. No, there's victories in battle and there's victories in war. There's a distinction.
Absolutely. And there are some times when we can win battles and lose the war. There have been innumerable situations. Okay, you know what, I've mentioned, he's no longer a state representative, Gary Siplin. He's from Apopka. And he was the one who introduced in the state legislature a bill that would create a state greeting. That's where Floridians, a state greeting. Now maybe it was only used in official capacity for the state in the month of December. And Merry Christmas, that bill passed, and Merry Christmas is now the official state greeting of Florida for the month of December. We, some of us in Florida turned to the people up at AU and they said, be strategic. Don't even engage in a battle because we're going to lose and it'll be worse. And that is, don't say anything about this bill. It will die of its own. And I have emails I can show you for them. It says, we know that this is going to die, and nobody's going to engage in this silliness, and therefore be quiet. Because if you engage in battle, you're going to arouse the troops on the other side, who will all get behind Gary Siplin and wave the banner of Jesus is the Lord of Florida, and we will lose the battle and hurt ourselves in the war. So there is that kind of thinking that in fact goes on, but it was the wrong advice. It is now the official greeting, Merry Christmas. So it's a complicated, we recognize winning battles and losing wars, that can happen.
Yeah, we understand that.
Battles and win the war.
We totally get that. We all understand that.
Right.
I was curious as to what your view was relative to AU in terms of the goal, in terms of winning, and what does winning look like to you? And I understand that there's battles and court cases, and you win court cases and you lose court cases, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and we all know that's still forward progress. But ultimately, what's the goal? And if you can't achieve your goal, then the question is, what's the impediment? What's the obstacle from achieving your goal?
Yeah, I would agree. And our goal, by the way, is to promote and to protect and defend the First Amendment of the Constitution's 2 religious clauses, no establishment of religion, and protect free exercise of religion. So that's our goal. And as long as we can freely exercise our religion, which in Florida I cannot, and there's no establishment of religion, which in Florida is getting close, and Christianity is the religion of Florida. So our job is to protect the integrity of the First Amendment. Okay? My religion does not permit me to fund organizations that teach kids that Jews are satanic. It just doesn't permit me. But I am forced to by the powers of taxation of the state. And so I have to violate my religion by paying taxes to the state of Florida.
You know, Merrill, again, I'm going to repeat, I'm very much fun. I would enjoy you coming back sometime in 2021. And if there was an opportunity for me and you to sit down and have an honest conversation about all this, I would like to take this much, much further in terms of the depth of the First Amendment and its relative meaning. And is it still relevant? But not now. I don't want to do this.
No, I agree we shouldn't do it now. I would welcome the opportunity to do exactly that, either under the auspices of the Free Thought Society. It could be outside a regular meeting. It could be outside, we could get together on Zoom.
Fair enough.
And I think these are important. You're raising important issues that we need to think about. And we need to think about why so many people in our state voted for Donald Trump, for example. You know, why does that seem sensible, logical? So it's hard to understand. And so why do people support candidates who believe in Christian dominionism? It's an interesting question too. Now, I will tell you, by the way, I'm a clergyman. I can tell you that certain religions, not all religions, but certain religions encourage people in the pews not to think. The pastor and the religious structure will do the thinking for you.
Most.
And you think most? Okay, I would like to be more optimistic, but because the people in power in the church and the hierarchy of the church is such that they want to do the thinking for the people in the pews, that's part of the problem.
Well, when I said earlier I want to discuss with you the First Amendment, I'm specifically talking about the religious clauses, the first,
right, not freedom of the press, freedom.
I think you understood that.
That's another matter.
I don't want to get into all the First Amendment issues,
sure.
But the religious clause, the 2 clauses,
absolutely,
and established.
I would welcome it. I would love it. Let's make sure it happens. You and I together.
And again, thank you very much.
And thank you all. And again, you have my email address. You have my contact information. Feel free to be in touch. I enjoy this very much.
I have a quick question. What about just one more quick question?
Anything. Because
you know that the Jacksonville City Council gives invocations. They still
yes,
really
okay.
That
They
much
do.
attention to know what kind of diversity they give. But Earl got talked into trying to, like, if they're going to do it, we want to be at the table. So he gave an invocation twice, but I think he's kind of burnt out and doesn't see the benefit is it. And I think you encouraged us to try to be represented, so there'd be some diversity there. But what is your feelings today? Is it worthwhile, or it's just that we want a moment of silence, and so should we even request to speak?
Okay, the little that I know about what happened at the Jacksonville City Council, and Susan and Earl have educated me, right? And I've been there when I was there when Earl gave his first invocation. Again, I live 60 miles south of you guys. It takes, and it's something the other side has, and I don't want to see it as a battle necessarily. The other side has a tenacity, and I'll call it a religious fervor, to make sure it happens. On our side, we were excited about it for a while, but sustaining the excitement and the energy and the vibrancy of a movement to change what's happening at the Jacksonville City Council takes a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of work. Specifically, it takes lining up clergy. Now, here's the issue. It is true that the Supreme Court decision, and we argued this case before the Supreme Court, of Galloway versus Greece, permits invocations at city council meetings, at legislative meetings. By the way, the school board is not a legislative, the school board doesn't make laws, it's not them, but it permits the city council to begin with an invocation, but that invocation may not be delivered by anyone on the city payroll, because then it becomes government speech. And so the city council is required to seek out others, clergymen. But by the way, what they discovered was that not all denominations have clergy. Quakers, Shakers do not have clergy. And Buddhists have clergy. It's an issue. It's a peculiarly Christian, or even Judeo-Christian, if there's such a thing, way of thinking. But the city council has to seek out clergy or other representatives to give invocations. And there were people here who were wonderful about finding other people and giving their names in. And there were some alternative people called to give invocations. And that effort continued for a year or two or three. By the way, some of the clergy themselves did not understand the import and said, I don't need to do this, it's not important. I'm not a political person, I'm not a government person, and so on, and don't understand what they lose. But it takes week after week after week of contacting clergy, contacting the Sikh community, contacting the Muslim community, contacting the Hindu community, contacting Buddhists, Quakers, Shakers, we have agnostics and atheists, and having us submit their names to be contacted by an employee of the city council who will then invite them to give invocations. But because we haven't done that, they have somebody from the First Baptist Church every month giving an invocation in Jesus's name, to make sure that we all know that we're sort of second-class citizens because Jesus doesn't mean anything to us. So it takes endless energy, time, effort, energy, and attention. And they can do that. We have to work on that. Okay, I know. And you gave me the name of a reverend who they shut the mic off on, which is another issue. Once again, as I said before, perhaps the answer is for us to step outside of our 501c3 organization and pick and choose a member of the city council whose behavior on this issue has been particularly egregious, and find somebody to run against them and campaign for them and fund them and give somebody a scare over the issue of allowing other denominations and other religions to offer invocations.
Yeah, I actually reported the, you know how you can do the report a violation through AU. I sent something in asking if AU would join or write a letter or something in support of Pastor Gundy. And one of the lawyers wrote me back and said, they'll keep an eye on it, and they might write a letter because his mic was turned off because they didn't like what he was saying, which seems, you know, he was saying like, we have to help the poor, and they didn't like that.
Yeah. Whether you're aware of it or not, Americans United for Separation of Church, and I'll share this letter with you, sent a demand letter to the city council that they cannot continue to have people, because there are several pastors, I believe, and certainly Jacksonville, and I urge you to look at the city council pages of other cities around Florida and around the country. Jacksonville's city council biographies all include the religious affiliation and what church the city council, whether they're 19 or 21 city council people. And a demand letter went and says, you have to allow people of other denominations. So Earl gave 2 invocations. Rabbi Fish gave several, and so did Rabbi Lubliner. Beyond that, and I have personally approached other rabbis and others, and I cannot get them to see the importance of this issue. And so we said, I'm not even a constituent, I'm 60 miles away, but if we can assemble a group of us who feel strongly about this and can sustain the effort, then I would encourage it. And I think you would as well.
Well, that's the thing, that the clergymen who give the most invocations, they're paid for that. I mean, that's their living, many of them. They're paid by their church members. We don't have anyone that's paid just to...
That's the clergy, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so but the city council has to invite clergy, and they can't keep inviting Baptist ministers over and over again to give the invocation. They've got to. By the way, to many denominations, to most Christians, prayer is not efficacious unless it mentions the name of Jesus. It's said in the name of Jesus. So some people, I've been, and you may have been, give lovely invocations and then end it by saying, and this we pray in Jesus' name, which lets us all know that, you know, we don't really belong. Again, thank you very much. There's much work to be done. Fred, again, I'm not moderating this necessarily, but Fred, we'll go on all night.
I'm just saying good night.
Share your feelings at the First Coast Free Thought Society activist Facebook page. Let's share your feelings at that. Go ahead, Fred.
I'm just saying good night, Merrill, and thanks for a great speech and discussion.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. If I'm successful, Ken, I will. If I'm successful, this will lead us to some kind of action. Right? And I hope on a personal basis, you'll pick up the phone, call Rubio, call Scott, call Rutherford, and say, please help us, the GSA, begin to process the security approvals of people who are going to be in the new Biden-Harris administration, to do it now so everybody's up to speed. And pick up the phone and just say that to them, and you will have participated in the democratic process every bit as much as you did when you went to the polls or submitted your ballot.
The phone numbers on that Facebook group. So if you
yeah, you know what, I'll post.
I'd like to mention too that since it's a group and not a page, anyone can post.
Yeah, okay.
So,
so share your thoughts, by all means. I would agree. Again, thank you very much. It's good to hear you, and I am invigorated by listening to you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.